Now, one of the many unknown factors about the next generation is the impacts that screens are going to have on the development of children's brains.
Yeah, well, a spotlight was shone on that during the week when Princess Catherine met with kids taking part in brain research at the University of East London.
Right, so let's find out a little bit more about that research. I'm pleased to speak to Dr. Katie Daubney, who's a child development psychologist, and joins us now. Dr. Daubney, thank you so much for being with us, and good morning to you. So I think let's just start, first of all, with why you became interested in working on sort of the development of children and how screen time affects them.
Hi, yes, thank you. Good morning. I think it's, as a parent myself, it's so important. It's of a concern to all parents. The world is changing so fast, and actually science is struggling to keep up. But even 20 years ago, the type of content that children accessed on screens was sort of longer form, 25-minute sort of long narrative, the kind of stuff that you'd access on iPlayer. And over the last 20 years, we've got good evidence that the type of content that children are looking at on screens, the screens are very different, so they're sort of much closer to them, but sort of it's online, short form content with much greater information complexity, much faster cut speeds. And so we're very interested in how these changes in the content that children are viewing is actually affecting their development.
So you're looking at how it affects their stress levels, their brain activity, aren't you? How do you do that? How do you assess what it's doing to a child's brain?
Yeah, well, that's the problem. There's an awful lot of what we think is happening, but there's very little good scientific evidence. So what we're doing at where I work at the Institute of Science for Early Years at the University of East London is a really fantastic study where we are having a look at the kind of content that children are exposed to. And a lot of that is sort of this short form content that I spoke to online, on YouTube. We've got a lot of evidence that children are watching more of this. And we're doing two things. We're analysing this type of content for the information complexity, the kind of visual stimuli, the auditory stimuli that children are exposed to. And then at the same time, we're taking children of different ages, fantastic children who are helping us with our research and coming to the Institute. And also we're visiting them in their homes. And while they're watching this content, we sort of put a cap on their head, which measures their brain activity, so the electrical activity in their brain while they're watching it. And also we have sort of physiological sensors, which can measure their stress levels. And all of this is presented often on amazing screens where we can track where the child is looking on the screen, so we can see the types of things that are attracting their attention, how their attention is being attracted, and what's actually going on in their brains and in their bodies while they're watching this content. And we're doing this with children of lots of different ages.
And what are you finding then, Doctor, from these kids that you are putting through this experiment?
Well, that's the problem. The science is very slow, so we haven't actually got the results of that side of it. But what we think, and from all of the evidence that we've sort of looked at already, and this is why we're conducting this study, is that very young children's brains are very kind of messy and over-connected if you look at a wiring diagram, and they process information far, far more slowly than older children and adults do. And the problem is, when brains are working, our brains are prediction machines. And so we're sort of, as we're interacting with the environment and the world around us, older, more experienced brains are sort of predicting what we see. They're very efficient at processing the environment that we're in. But very young children and babies obviously have no experience of the world, and so they're very slow at processing information. They need things which are very repetitious and very predictable. And the problem with a lot of this content is it's so fast-paced that when information like this is coming at you and capturing your attention, we get a signal which is sent from a part of the brain called the brainstem, which regulates our arousal levels. And it sends a signal that we might actually be in danger. We're in a very unpredictable situation. This information's coming at us so fast, far too fast for young brains to be able to process properly. And this activates our kind of sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight part of the nervous system, which means, which kind of makes our heart beat faster and releases a lot of energy to our muscles, even though these children are sitting still watching this content. And we think that when children are quite often put in this kind of high arousal state, there's longitudinal sort of associations between excessive watching of this kind of fast-paced information complex content and possibly sort of behavioral and emotional dysregulation later on.
That's so interesting. Thanks for explaining that to us. I found that absolutely fascinating. But so, Katie, what would your advice be to parents watching now? I mean, as you say, the definitive research isn't concluded yet, but what would your advice be to parents of young children who are thinking of putting screens in front of their children?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We know that screens are used constantly. So we don't want to be, as a kind of scientific community, sort of saying, this is bad, you mustn't use screens. We know that screens are used, and they do have a part to play in every children's lives. But what we would say that, although often parents want to know how much time, we would say it's far more important to think about the quality of the types of things that children are watching, and to perhaps focus on sort of maybe the older programs, which are much slower, have a lot of kind of repetition in them, and follow the narratives of maybe just a few characters rather than sort of lots of characters quickly changing. So slow-paced, sort of predictable, almost more slow for most parents to be able to bear, actually.
But much better, and I can see that as the father of a 5-year-old, I can see the difference when my son watches those kinds of things. And one question for you, and sorry to keep you, but this is fascinating to me, Doctor, is the sort of the fantasy that children see on TV. When we were younger, you know, if you watched a cartoon, you probably saw it once a week. If you missed it, you didn't see it, and everything was real life. These kids these days are just watching pure cartoons. Everything is fantastical. Is there research into sort of what that's doing to their imagination, to their where their brains are developing, seeing sort of fantastical things at all points?
Yeah, well, I'm not entirely sure whether there's research on this kind of content, you know, sort of the narrative structure and this sort of thing. But what I would say is that we know that children learn best when they're able to explore the world and interact with it. And one of the things about screens is it's a very sort of passive activity, and all of this stuff is sort of being fed into children. And there isn't we know that a lot of really, really good learning happens in relationships between people, where as an adult, you sort of change how you interact with a child depending on their mood and their state and what they're interested in. So learning that is child-led is sort of a much better way for children to be interested in the world and learn about things, rather than just sort of receiving a lot of information passively.